Hello? Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. So, morning, everyone. I know that you were here for the full day yesterday, even though we had a late start. And we heard in the morning, in the opening, how this event came about through a dialogue between the AG, the Honorable Dale Marshall, and the Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey. So Minister Humphrey shared with us yesterday how they had thought about this event and how they planned it and brought it to fruition. And I think the reason that all of us are here is because the knowledge, experience, and problem solving abilities of this group are necessary at this time to bring us to a solution to this challenge. Yesterday, he also mentioned some of the figures. To reiterate, between 2016 and 2018, the police received more than one domestic violence report per day. And of course, the conditions of COVID-19 were ideal to bring this issue of domestic violence to a boiling point. About 12% of women in Barbados have reported, yes? Echoing? Yeah. I can't do anything about it. I don't know what to do. Should I just project? Oh, they can't hear me at the back. Yeah, it's annoying to me too. Can these technical folks at the back help us? Yeah.
212.
Hello? Still echoing? Sir, this one is still echoing. A little less.
Two, one, two.
The lack of timely, detailed information makes it hard to understand the full scale of the issue and even harder to design solutions that work. So we start with the human element because, of course, this is the most important. But even beyond the personal toll on individuals, domestic violence also attacks the country's development. It puts pressure on health systems, justice systems, and economies. To put this in context, in Jamaica, the cost of violence against women was estimated at 6.6% of GDP. In Grenada, it was 5.24%, representing billions of dollars lost across the region. This is why the issue is not just a woman's issue. We need allies at all levels of society, including the AG and Minister Humphrey. This is an issue for all of us, men, women, policymakers, employers, civil society. We all have a role to play. So what are some of the things that we can do? For one, we can strengthen reporting and enforcement systems. Survivors should not have to jump through hoops or relive their trauma just to get help. We can have one-stop service centers, more shelter access, and frontline responders who are trained in trauma-informed care. When systems work, lives are saved. When they don't, survivors fall through the cracks. All of us in this room today can contribute to identifying and developing more solutions. And that's what we're going to do in this session today. I just want to mention briefly some of the work that the IDB has been doing in this area across the region. Yesterday, my colleague would have mentioned the Hope and Justice Centers in Guyana. We've worked on national prevalence surveys in 5 Caribbean countries, and we hope to do so in Barbados. We've funded specialized training for the police and legal reforms, specifically in Jamaica, around sexual harassment. Yesterday, we heard about some of the things that Barbados has already done. What we have learned from all of our interventions and partnerships is that it's absolutely critical to put survivors at the center of everything that we do. But of course, there is not just one one-size-fits-all solution that can be applied in every country. That's why we have to sit together and collaborate to develop something that's suitable for Barbados. We had the inputs yesterday, and there is expertise that each person in this room can bring to the table. And so this morning and for the rest of the day, we're aiming to move the needle forward by developing a roadmap for a national domestic violence action plan. At the IDB, we are committed to being your partner in this initiative and other related activities going forward. My colleague, Maria Jose Martinez Arroyo, is here, and she will continue to participate in today's proceedings. This isn't the last time we'll be in touch. There are many others across the region who have been contributing their efforts and will continue to do so. The fact that we're all here is proof that we care about coming up with a solution, we're listening, and we're ready to act. We have already taken action, and we have to continue to keep the momentum going. So every person who would have been a victim of domestic violence in Barbados can live free from fear and realize their full potential. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the outcome of today's discussions.
And thank you very much to Ms. Karina Cockburn. We will now have the UN Women Representative, Ms. Angela Davis, Partnerships and Resource Mobilization Specialist, to give her remarks.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I bring you hearty greetings from our head of office acting, Ms. Isuo Iahen, who was here yesterday, but who has to be at another forum this morning, and also from our EVOS specialist, Janelle Mirage, who's in Trinidad, but who covers Barbados and the other 21 countries that UN Women serves as our focal point on this issue. So I'm kind of a substitute today. But I thoroughly enjoyed being here yesterday. Enjoy might not be the right word. It was eye-opening, it was heartening, and it was also a session that troubled me deeply. It troubled me because I remember being in the same room many years ago when we were addressing this issue. And I think it was when we were looking to reform the existing legislation, which led to the changes in 2016, I believe, as was mentioned. And it's troublesome because we are tackling the same issues, confronting the same challenges, and again, seeking effective solutions to try to deal with this scourge. So maybe it was fortuitous me being here because it allows me with a different hat to look at the issue perhaps from a different lens and to see how I can be a part of the change solutions with all of you. So I look forward to participating today. So now back to the remarks. I'm deeply honored to be here with you today as we continue our collective journey towards addressing and eradicating domestic violence in our society. Reflecting on day one, I was reminded of a Bajan literary, George Lamming's work, In the Castle of My Skin, and a particular chapter which reads, He would come home drunk and start to beat her. She would try to protect herself, but he was too strong. We would hear the slaps, the thuds, and her cries. We were too scared to intervene, huddled together in a corner, praying for it to stop. This scene vividly describes the physical and emotional impact of domestic violence on the family, highlighting the fear and helplessness experienced by the children who witness it. The novel offers a powerful narrative that sheds light on the complexities of domestic violence, critiquing the structures and norms that perpetuate this seemingly continuous cycle. It reinforced that this is not just a personal issue, but a societal one, and one that requires our collective action, and hence why we are all here gathered. In the Caribbean region, the prevalence of intimate partner violence is alarmingly high. You've heard the statistics mentioned yesterday, and you heard Karina mention them again. We were pleased to have partnered with IDB in conducting the prevalence studies across those 5 countries, and we hope to further partner in doing a prevalence study here in Barbados. But these statistics show that up to 30% of women have experienced physical or sexual violence by a partner in their lifetime. I won't reiterate the statistics mentioned about the numbers in the last 2 years. But while there was a decline in serious crime, there was still a spike in domestic violence. These numbers are not just statistics. They represent real lives, real pain, and real challenges which are faced by women and girls across our region. They underscore the urgent need for action and the importance of our work here today. As it was addressed yesterday, there are many facets to domestic violence, and while women and girls are disproportionately affected, we fully recognize that any violence inflicted on another human being is unacceptable. There are a range of direct costs associated with domestic violence, including, as was mentioned, the cost on the healthcare system, the police, justice and welfare systems, as well as the cost to the victim support services, shelters, counseling, and legal aid, which we can argue are insufficient. There are also indirect costs related, such as the loss of employment, wages and productivity, learning time lost, and harm to the well-being of survivors and their children. Ultimately, the negative effects impact the lives of communities and undermines poverty and reduction measures. Yesterday, we learned that 60% of unnatural deaths were amongst women and girls. 380 of those 552 domestic violent cases were women, with 430 men being perpetrators. These alarming statistics, which persist despite the national alignment with international treaties, conventions, and best practices, as we learn that as well as also local and legislative policy reforms for which the government of Barbados is to be applauded. However, one must ask, what more do we have to do? UN Women is poised to support the government of Barbados in its efforts and will be able to provide technical support through support for the development of a national action plan on domestic violence, which we've spoken of, the rollout of updated partnerships for peace programs, which we've also spoken of. It's time sometimes that we revisit these things and see how we need to update them. Institutional strengthening of duty bearers through the gender responsive policing program. We've been pleased to partner with other development partners to enhance the capacity of the police. And support to advance the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is gaining momentum for this region. We will continue our resource mobilization efforts to support the increasing availability of globally comparable data on violence against women and girls. And we do wholeheartedly support the call for a national prevalence survey here in Barbados. Our efforts must be comprehensive and multifaceted. This includes further strengthening of the legal frameworks, improving access to justice, providing support services for survivors, and engaging men and boys in the conversation. It also involves addressing the social norms and cultural practices which perpetuate violence and discrimination against women. This cultural connection was presented yesterday by Ms. Burnett in her opening presentation, but it is one which is rarely given the attention it deserves. And if we are to arrest the deep-rooted cultural influences which shape our socialization and notions of gender and power, we need to provide more attention to this issue. The Beijing Platform for Action, now celebrating its 30th year, was critical then, and it remains critical now. It's a comprehensive policy agenda for achieving gender equality, offering a roadmap to addressing the root causes of gender-based violence and ensuring women's voices are heard in all areas of life. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda and the Beijing Platform for Action are closely linked in their shared commitment to advancing gender equality and women's rights, with both frameworks addressing the importance of women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in decision-making, especially in conflict prevention, resolution, and peace building. Women's participation in the peace processes are indispensable, especially in the Caribbean, where communities are often vulnerable to natural disasters, socio-political tensions, and are hardest hit by gang-related violence. We must emphasize the role of women as active contributors to peace building and security, promoting sustainable development and inclusive cooperation across multiple nations. The government of Barbados, in collaboration with UN Women, other UN agencies, development partners, CSOs, and NGOs, have made significant strides in addressing gender-based violence. However, the journey is far from over. We must continue to build on these efforts and ensure that our actions are informed by data, evidence, and the voices of those most affected by violence. While this may be a marathon and not a sprint, every hour of every day, another life is in jeopardy, and for many, time ran out. We must also remember the humanity behind the statistics and not allow the testimonies of survival and resilience, as was shared yesterday, and those that we may not have heard before be in vain. Remember, 1 in 3. Today, we will delve deeper into the strategies and initiatives that can help us close the gaps and advance our national priorities. As we participate in today's activities, I encourage each of you to engage actively, share your perspectives, and contribute to the development of actionable solutions, as Minister Humphrey implored us so to do. Remember, our strength lies in our unity and our shared commitment to a violence-free society. Let what we do today be reflected in our shared vision for the development of Barbados and indeed the Caribbean, where every woman, girl, man, and boy can live with dignity, safety, and respect. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive and impactful day and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Davis. Now, as you've mentioned, we did have a lot of discussion. We heard so much information yesterday. And to make sure that it's fresh in your minds and setting the context for today, we're going to have a recap by one of our rapporteurs, Dr. Margaret Gill, who would have been assisting with the note-taking and record-keeping describing yesterday. So she'll recap for us what we did so that it can set the context for us to move forward into today.
Okay, this is the work of 3 rapporteurs produced in the early hours of the morning, and therefore it's going to have some overlaps in some places because I didn't get a chance to fully collate all the information. Everybody can hear me, right? I'm talking clearly enough. Okay, so the first session was the National Policy Framework and Domestic Violence Response. The identified gaps were limited institutional capacity at the Bureau of Gender Affairs, the lack of victim participation in shaping policies and legislation, and insufficient data to help in better understanding of the kind and level of domestic violence. That issue of data arises in every one of the sessions. I'm going to try not to repeat it, but it arises in every one of the sessions. The recommendations, I should have started by telling you, we organize the information in terms of gaps, recommendations, and areas for collaboration. So that ought to help with what you're going to be doing later on today. And these can be available to you at some point during the process. Okay, so recommendations from that first session was to develop a comprehensive domestic violence policy that should be framed within a broader gender-based violence framework, and that would include a thorough needs assessment. Recommendation to strengthen institutional capacity, improve data collection and research, enhance public awareness campaigns to promote a better understanding of how DV works, work with media outlets to promote positive narratives on gender equality and domestic violence prevention. The areas for collaboration, an area for collaboration identified in that session was the government and stakeholders should work together to address the violence comprehensively. So a general suggestion on collaboration. From the question and answer session, which was joined by the Director of Bureau of Women's Gender Affairs, Mr. William Warner, the gaps identified were lack of inter-ministerial collaboration, the exclusion of psychological, economic, and social factors in data collection on domestic violence, and limited consideration of intersectionality issues. In this specific case, the vulnerable groups, including LGBTQI+ coalition, identify that members and persons who identify as trans are at a greater risk of violence, but the existing policies do not address this. Recommendations from that session identified data collection and research, the need for a national prevalence study. A second recommendation was expand the domestic violence programs to continue school-based initiatives that educate children and the staffing of the schools. Develop targeted policies for vulnerable groups, including the LGBTQI+ community, to address their unique risks and challenges. Areas for collaboration: improve interministerial collaboration to ensure data sharing, work closely with civil society organizations, so this is the state talking, schools and research institutions, to expand the reach and impact of the DV initiatives. Enhance partnerships with international bodies for technical and financial support. On the area of social norms, gender, and domestic violence, the presentation by Isua of the UN Women focused on the role of gender equality and empowerment in addressing gender-based violence. That is a paper that was presented, so I'm not going to go through the details, all the details of the paper, but identify the gaps that UN Women identified, inconsistencies in legal framework and enforcement mechanisms, and the need for better interagency coordination and integration of legal definitions. Institutional weaknesses that included issues of training and resources, the limited access to comprehensive and anonymous data for effective policymaking. So as you see, data is coming up again and again. Recommendations related to that: strengthen the legal frameworks to deal with DV, enhance institutional capacity, promote gender equitable norms through awareness campaigns that engage men and boys and encourage balanced power dynamics in relationships. Strengthen support networks and ensure safe, accessible reporting channels. On the session for good practices in DV prevention and response, the gaps identified were as follows: inconsistent implementation of policies and action plans. While the frameworks exist, challenges remain in the execution and sustainability. A lack of clear accountability mechanisms to track progress also exists. A second second gap is resource constraints and over-reliance on volunteers. Thirdly, weak institutional coordination and referral pathways. There's a need for support in relation to this. Support to survive for survivors is often ad hoc rather than systematically integrated across social services, healthcare services, justice, and education. Gender-responsive policing and judicial gaps is another one that comes up in several of the sections. The need for a specific one that was identified was there's a need for disaster response mechanisms that identify gender-based violence risks. So in our situations of climate change and the hazards that we face generally, there's a need for responses that take into consideration all the data that says that violence, domestic violence against women and girls in particular, increase at these moments. Key recommendations: strengthen implementation and accountability, professionalize and fund frontline DV services, formalize multi-sectorial referral pathways so that you create official partnerships between welfare agencies, NGOs, law enforcement, and health services, expand prevention programs and training, and improve the disaster response and protection measures. So some of the gaps identified automatically imply the kind of recommendation that is needed. Areas for collaboration: government and UN women, cross-sector integration, and international sharing of best practices and knowledge, as well as capacity building for NGOs and civil society, judicial and law enforcement strengthening. In this regard, we identified that there needs to be a specialized DV court intervention that incorporates the Partnership for Peace program, of which we heard some information. There was also identified that the one-stop shop service model could be adopted. We could look at that program in order to see to what extent it can be incorporated into the responses of Barbados. Surveys on masculinity and gender norms have been done in several Caribbean countries that inform behavior change strategies, and this needs to be given greater consideration. Technology-driven programs such as WhatsApp-based interventions need to be created, particularly to improve relationship dynamics. Gaps that were also identified in this area were lack of data in some countries, limited evaluation of what works, so success stories have also been limited, and barriers to accessing services exist for survivors. Recommendations: expand the prevalence survey, strengthen interventions targeting men and boys, and increase the use of digital solutions. Potential areas for collaboration that exist in this area are partnerships with UN Women and regional governments, joint research initiatives, regional knowledge sharing forums to exchange insights and successful strategies. Many faith-based organizations such as churches, mosques, and temples were identified by some respondents in a survey done by the UN as not seen by women as supportive or safe spaces. And this gap limits the potential of faith-based institutions in addressing GBV issues. A recommendation that comes out of this is use the data from studies on young men's perception of masculinity to create targeted interventions addressing the issues of control and toxic masculinity in intimate relations. Areas of collaboration were identified between the faith-based organizations, which is a great way to identify, to help change societal norms relating to GBV, and in the promotion of healthy relationships and supportive environments. There was a panel discussion and a Q&A on quality essential services and DV referral pathways, and these are some of the issues that came out of that. The Family Intervention Unit discussed its role in handling domestic violence cases, ensuring legal protection for survivors, and working with law enforcement to improve investigative processes. And this service operates on a 24-hour basis with after-hours on-call service. So it's one of the success stories that we were able to hear about. And this agency works especially with the Child Care Board and the Business and Professional Women's Clubs, as well as other agencies. Importantly, they accompany persons to court for protection orders and reports incidents for legal action. So this is information that needs to be shared far more widely than it's available, given the survivor stories that two survivor stories we're going to hear about. Holistically, the unit collects data, and this information is shared with other agencies. So there's a suggestion that it is shared, but there's also the question of interagency sharing of data. So evidently gaps exist there. The Barbados Professional Women's and Professional Organization identified information about their shelter for domestic violence victims, and they gave some information about its creation in 1999 after it was established as a club. Then the shelter was created in 1999, and it supports women and children under 14 for males and females of any age affected by domestic violence. It has a hotline as part of the services for the shelter. The shelter has various professionals, psychologists, counselors, etc., who are involved, as well as they give information that enable the survivors and the clients to build stronger lives after they leave there. We're going to hear some more specific kinds of support that was identified by the survivors. Advocates against domestic abuse also spoke about their frontline work in crisis response, advocacy, and connecting survivors to critical resources such as legal aid, counseling, and housing assistance. We got some information about when they started, but I think we can. Okay. It plans to launch training programs for personal development, job preparation, and literacy, and collaborates with local organizations and the public to secure donations and resources. So this is an entirely an agency that is funded in an ad hoc manner. So there's evidently need to concentrate more on the issue of resources for frontline agencies. Challenges and gaps identified were limited shelter capacity, financial and staffing constraints, lack of employment opportunities. Many domestic violence survivors need job training and support. Educational barriers, limited integration with healthcare system, and the need for structured DV intervention for children, addressing the impact of exposure to domestic violence. Recommendations and future actions flow from these in terms of expanding programs to help survivors achieve independence, strengthening partnerships, developing better mechanisms for reporting, etc. The need for building a transitional space for survivors who have left the shelter or otherwise access some type of service relating to domestic violence was highlighted. there's a need to set up a framework on ways to secure funding for erection of a building as a transitional space with the subsequent services, personnel services that this would imply. Limited public awareness emerged as a significant gap, and funding for the shelters which face funding constraints. That low public awareness about the resources that are available to this area. Areas for collaboration included training and advocacy for domestic violence, which would require coordination among the Labor College, law enforcement agencies, and shelters to provide specialized domestic training. Collaboration among the charities themselves and between them and the government entities and private sector donors to accelerate resources for the transitional housing project and strengthening of data, etc. Legislation and implementation gaps. Magistrate Frederick explained the significant changes which were made in 2016 to update the 1992 Domestic Violence Act, and these areas summarized are a tighter definition of the rights and persons on whose behalf the legislation could be deployed, greater specificity in the definition of domestic violence, which include widening the concept to include intimidation and stalking, enable the capturing of other culturally legitimate intimate sexual relationships that were not legal formalized marriages, including visiting relationships, widening the powers of the police to make assessment at the scene of a DV report, and to offer temporary removal of the aggressor under the emergency protection order tool, and these extend up to keeping the aggressor in remand till the court hearing for a protection order to be heard. Increasing police services to aid the victim in help seeking and counseling through institution of the Family Conflict Unit, and requirement of the police to record every call for services, including domestic violence, including extending the recording details of a call for service and the police actions, and then increasing accountability by making these reports required to be sent up to the level of the Commissioner of Police. Magistrate Frederick also explained in detail the process for acquiring the 3 types of orders: final, intermediate, and breach of order. The gaps, there were 3 gaps, 4 gaps and recommendations that came from here that may repeat some of what we've said before. Education and outreach to the public on the concepts, the processes, and the requirements by the courts on the acquisition of protection offered by the state. Institution of a specialized court was suggested with appropriately skilled and experienced personnel to deal with domestic violence and family matters. Explore the possibility of legislating mutual protection orders was another suggestion that was made, and after discussion, the comment was added with appropriate safeguards to avoid re-victimization of the person who initially sought help, and the implementation of more sensitization training, in particular emotional intelligence training was identified. The question and answer session repeated a number of the issues such as research and data collection, greater need for counseling, this one was specific to this issue, need to change the language of the legislation to recognize that not all intimate partner relationships are husband and wife or heterosexual. And while children's best interest is a stated special concern of the state, this may not be implemented in a case where the aggressor is given access to children who have had to witness their mother being abused. It also, that best interest of the child may not exist if the sexual abuse cases take so long that the victim becomes an adult and may not want to pursue the case. Recommendation: the police and the court should work more closely with civil society organizations to enable victims to be heard and supported more intimately. Individuals should be given a better understanding of the information required and the use of the order forms. Training for the police and the courts in issues and needs of transgender individuals, especially as it relates to children and individuals who have been forced out of their homes because of their sexual preferences. There needs to be greater access to information by individuals and the public in understanding actions to take when there's a breach of a protection order. And the strong recommendation was made that there should be faster turnaround of cases of child sexual abuse in the court system. The areas for collaboration, again, involve civil societies to partner with the state agencies. The LGBTQI coalition identified that they could partner with the police and the state to offer training and sensitization on issues of DV affecting individuals within that community. There's also an area of collaboration is the need to understand how different kinds of legislation can be activated to ensure fast and effective action. So this is not just agencies, but also examining the different kinds of legislation dealing with harm to individuals to see the extent to which other kinds of legislation can be called on for fast and effective action. The final session, survivors' accounts of the justice continuum, and I picked up a quote that was made by the second speaker. Justice is not only about redressing abuse, it is also about healing. That is a very powerful statement. Two survivors of the ravages of domestic violence shared their journeys through the places of active abuse and their final emergence into freedom and wholeness. Their stories highlighted the need for greater understanding, sensitivity, practical help, and information to victims. They also highlighted the need for child services, including schools, to be better prepared to deal with the effects of this hard journey, which is often felt to be taken alone. And instead of organizing it, I go a little out of the thing of gaps and collaboration, etc., to talk about some of the impacts that were identified by the survivors. Physical terror and suffering coupled with psychological harm. Silence from individuals who are observers, and we haven't talked a lot about those in the conference so far. State agencies, which have the duties of care, and from oneself because of fear and shame. So those different kinds of silences need to be addressed. Also significant for us to hear was the trauma that emerges for children through terror of psychological harm, through interrupted schooling, and also through disrupted mothering, because mothers are forced to go into survival mode only. This session was very, The disruption of normal skills development for economic and help-seeking matters, but this was counteracted by one of the sisters telling us about the healing that is happening because you also get, if you get the right kind of help, the development of creative skills. And another final area of impact was the trauma that emerges for family and friends. There's a great need for understanding this issue in its entirety because sometimes some of the responses come from fear and shame that others who are closely associated have. And I think that we really need to acknowledge the friends who gave the support to the first victim. She went above and beyond the call of duty. The gaps where greater empathy from the police is needed initially, but this, in one case in particular, was underscored by the help that was shown by individual members of the police service. So some police officers do offer that individual help and care, and that underscores the need for it to be institutionalized. The need for greater privacy and protection at hospitals in cases where help has to be sought there. The adversarial situation in the courts continues to re-victimize victims of domestic violence. And the recommendations that came were the real movement and contribution to healing happens when the police and the courts respond with empathy. And there's a need for patient advocacy and intervention training for hospital staff, as well as for staff of schools. Civil society organizations greatly impact the healing process by restoring a sense of worth, especially with the integration of creative expression and enabling advocacy skills of survivors to be explored. And my suggestion is that we try to attach the poem that we heard to the report that was done. Collaborations identified, law enforcement, service, and protection values need to be better integrated. So the law enforcement, their service, as well as their protective values, all three of those need to be integrated in a better way. The courts, civil society organization, and social workers, that's a significant area for collaboration. And another area, final area, is the creative expressions sector, the artists, the writers, etc., could be invited to collaborate with civil society organizations to aid in the healing process. And that's it.
At the end of Dr. Gill's presentation, she talked about the experiences of the survivors who shared their stories with us yesterday. And if you will recall, the representative from UN Women, Isiwa Yahen, had asked a question about a case in Trinidad, the Tot Lampkin case. So it's a case, Tot Lampkin versus the Attorney General in Trinidad and Tobago, and that case has relevance for us here in Barbados. So I'd like to ask the representative from the Office of the DPP, Mr. Straker. Yes? No? No? Oh. Right. And he is going to make a presentation on the salient points of that landmark case. And your task, as you listen to that presentation, is to listen closely and think deeply about the gaps, what went wrong in that case. so that when we are looking at our action plans, we can make sure to build into the action plans the safeguards that would ensure that what went wrong in Trinidad does not go wrong here or does not continue to go wrong here. So that's the ear that you will be using when you listen to that presentation, one where you're looking at the gaps and trying to think of ways to ensure that it does not happen again in Barbados.
Good morning, everyone. All right, so we're talking about the Top Lampkin case, but I think it's important for us to understand what the state of the law was before that case. So essentially what happened in Top Lampkin was a decision that said a person could bring a constitutional claim if the government failed to protect someone who'd been a victim of domestic violence. Prior to that, the state of the law was that a person could bring a claim in negligence. And that may sound strange to us, but that was established in the UK in their Supreme Court, which is now the House of Lords' name, in Michael and others, and the Chief Constable of South Wales Police and another. And I'm just going to speak briefly about that before I move on to talk about the Top Lampkin case. So in Michael and others, I don't want to say victim, but the victim, she'd called the police to report that her ex-boyfriend had come to her house and found her there with her current boyfriend. And he'd taken her car keys and her car to drop that person to their house. And whilst leaving, he told her, "I'm going to take him and come back and kill you." She told this to the police, who in the UK, they rated that call or report, as a 1, which meant that a police officer should respond within 15 minutes. The challenge was, this was not the district that the report was supposed to be made to. That information was passed on to the correct district, who changed the rating of the call to a 2, which meant that a police officer ought to respond within 60 minutes. During that time, a second call came in, and the victim was heard screaming on that call, and then it cut off. Now, in her first call, she indicated that he was mere minutes away. The court found that there was a duty of care owed to her because of the proximity, and the proximity came from the fact that they'd received the report. They knew from the recording of the report that she was in imminent danger, and the court said a duty of care ought to extend to her to ensure her safety. So that they said, yes, a duty of care is owed, and in negligence, a claim can be brought against the state. Now, Top Lampkin goes a bit further, because in negligence, we have to establish that a duty of care is owed. But under constitutional law, you only have to show that there is a positive duty on the state to act. So the court looked at the provision for the right to life, because that's what it was brought under in Trinidad. And I'm going to get into the facts to explain the rationale that the court used. So in Top Lampkin, several reports were made to the police. That is 4 reports over the course of 4 years. The first report was made in 2013, and that report was in May 2013. She called to inform the police that he damaged her cell phone. This is her then boyfriend. The police came, spoke to him about damaging the phone, and advised him to pay her back for that phone, and told her, come to the police station to collect the money, which she did. The second report was in November 2015, and she reported that he'd been violent, he was cursing, they were in the apartment together, and her mother came and found all of her belongings just thrown about, torn up, and her son said to the mother, "Dada cuff mommy," in her face. A report was made to police, and Police came to the residence because he was still there, and they had to pin him to the ground to restrain him and get him to calm down. He was even fighting with police. A third report was made June 2017. And in June 2017, he broke into her apartment while she was sleeping. She fled that apartment to her mother's house, where he later came with their child in the rain and said, if you don't want him to stay in the rain, you have to let me in. They opened the door, and when he went in, he drew a knife and held it to her mother's throat and told her, I'm going to kill you and everyone in this house if you don't let me have your daughter. Police were called, but they never responded to the incident. They were called twice, and on the second call, they indicated that there were no vehicles at the station, and it would be best for them to come the next day to make a report. And you may be wondering, well, where is he at this time? He'd been chased from the house by the mother's common-law husband. And the common-law husband had to fight him off while he had the knife. The fourth incident, it occurred the day before the victim died. She called police and indicated to them that he'd beaten her in public. They were still on the location, and the police officer came to the scene where he spoke with her and him, and the officer indicated to the court that they both just wanted each other warned for the beatings. They did not want to go to the doctor. They did not want to press charges. So he warned them, and he left. And she was found dead in the street the next day. In addition to these police reports, she'd also gone to the magistrate's court. And this happened in 2017. So in 2017, she attended the magistrate's court in September 2017, where her complaint essentially was that he had damaged her bag in May of that year. The magistrate was not available at the first hearing, so it was adjourned. And when the magistrate was available, the magistrate indicated to her that domestic violence protection orders are serious applications, should only be made if one is actually seeking a protection order, and it was her suspicion that it was only to get maintenance. That is the reason for the application. The complainant in that instance, the victim, indicated that she really wanted a protection order because she was fearful of the threats he'd made to kill her and to stick her with what he termed an AIDS needle. The magistrate told her that those were not pleaded in her case, and she explained to the magistrate the reason they were not pleaded is that the application before her had been made in May, but she had not attended, and because it was not disposed, the clerk said it would be easier for her to use the old application as opposed to entering a new application. The magistrate adjourned the matter. They came on 2 subsequent occasions, and the first of those occasions, the magistrate again pressed her about the fact that she thought that the protection order was for maintenance. On the third occasion, that's October 23rd, 2017, she did not appear, but the respondent, he did appear, and he indicated to the court that the protection order would not be necessary. She told him that she would not be coming. They were working things out, and he'd started to pay maintenance to mind his child, and he recognized that his issue was anger. And because he knew it was anger, he could now do something to deal with the anger that was in the relationship. And the magistrate, hearing from just him, opted to dismiss the application. The court assessed both the actions of the magistrate as well as the actions of the police. But before doing that, the court looked at the right to life provision in Trinidad. In Trinidad, the right to life provision, and I'm going to take a little detour from just talking about the case to talk about constitutional law just a bit. The right to life provision in Trinidad comes from what we term a second-generation constitution or Bill of Rights provision. So our constitutions, as written constitutions, first came in when we got independence. We had the provisions given to us by England, and when other states either opted to become republics or to do constitutional reform, they amended those constitutions and they began to look more like the Charter of Rights from Canada. So that when Trinidad became a republic, that's what they did. So their provision is slightly different to ours. And the court looked at the provision which says the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of person, and enjoyment of property, and the right not to be deprived thereof except by due process of law. So the court embarked on constitutional interpretation to say that this created two separate rights which had two separate functions. One was positive and the other negative. Now, a negative right requires the state to put things in place to prohibit things from happening. So what that would mean is Barbados would have to have a police service to stop crime. It does not mean that every single crime would be stopped, but you have to have a police service to stop crime. A positive obligation on a state means that the police have to stop it. And the court found that the first half, that is the right of the individual to life, liberty, security of the person, and enjoyment of property, was a positive obligation. It required the state to act once they were aware that a person would be in danger, imminent danger, to ensure that that right was guaranteed. And the court found that in this instance, the police ought to have known that her life was in danger. And the court assessed the 4 incidents that I spoke to you about earlier. And the court said there is both the objective and subjective tests. So from her perspective, which would be subjective, she indicated these incidents occurred. She indicated that she was afraid or fearful of harm being done to her by her boyfriend. The police had an obligation not just to take her report, but to investigate her report. And from their investigations, to determine if that was so, and if it was so, to stop him from being able to do that. And the court went on to say that the only effective way to do that would have been arrest and charging him. And the court even indicated that in all of the instances where reports were made, there were offenses for which he could be charged. The court assessed the actions of the magistrate as well. And what was interesting in relation to that is ordinarily, we try to stay away from constitutional law as it relates to the decisions of magistrates and judges. We would more use judicial review. But the court said because of the positive nature of the obligation, this was subject to constitutional action. And the court said that the actions of the magistrate, to use my words, were insufficient. The magistrate had an obligation not just to look at what was on the paper in front of them, but to determine from what was said to her if there was an actual danger in place and if to grant the order. Now, what jumped out at me, and I think we have provisions relative to that, is at the first hearing before the magistrate, the respondent told the magistrate, "You can grant the order. I don't mind if you put it in place." So he was essentially agreeing to that. And their legislation allowed for the granting of an order where there was no opposition from the respondent. But yet, the magistrate refused to do so. The court said that was a dereliction, just that alone. Going on to look at the actions of the magistrate on the second and third occasions, the court said that the magistrate appeared to be imposing what they thought the purpose of the application was, as opposed to listening to the complainant to determine if there was any actual harm. And on one of those occasions, I believe it was the third occasion, the complainant indicated to the magistrate that he had been creating fake profiles on the internet and sending out nude photos of her to their friends, even her work colleagues, so as to get her to lose her job. She had those photos with her on the outside and the profile, and he took the envelope and ripped it up. So that, to my mind, the magistrate had enough information to do what needed to be done, but refused to do so. Now, the implications of this case is, of course, that the police and the magistracy now have an obligation to act. And we know that the obligation exists in our legislation, and I want to thank Magistrate Douglas Fredericks for his presentation yesterday as it relates to the strides that we made in the 2016 legislation. Because the obligation to act is not only now implied by common law, but it is in our legislation. So the police have a duty to act. And breaching that duty means that we expose ourselves either to a claim for negligence or a claim for constitutional redress. Now, the challenge I foresee with the constitutional redress is that we still have the first generation constitution in Barbados. The way that it is framed is completely different to what they have in Trinidad.
It has to elicit the evidence from them. I have to find myself asking them the questions to bring out the points that they have to prove. Whereas if they have an attorney, it's easier for me to sit and listen, all right? And without getting into the arena, because the respondent is innocent until proven guilty, of course. So I have to make sure I don't get into the arena, but I have to ask those questions, and I have to use emotional intelligence. As you said, we are trained, most of us or all of us are trained in emotional intelligence. So I thank you very much for your presentation. It was very relay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we are heading out for a brief coffee break now, and that is going to be a 10-minute break. And during that time, I want you to go down to the back. There should be a table outside, and then you sign up for the group that you're going to be working in, the pillars. So some of you might have previously indicated what area you want to work in when we're coming back to do the working group aspect of things. If you haven't as yet, go and sign up. So you're going to divide yourselves according to your expertise, your experience, your interests. That's all one thing. There's not three separate things. Your interests and your experience and your expertise, and you assign yourself to that group. So we have legislation, policy, social norms and prevention, essential services, data, and collaboration. Those are the groups. Collaboration, data, essential services, social norms and prevention, policy, and legislation. So we're going to take what we learned, what we listened to, and get ready to put it down on paper in concrete, actionable ways. So you go assign yourselves to your group within the 10 minutes of your coffee break.
Just need a picture.
We're going to resume in about 5 minutes, so start wrapping up your break and reorienting your mind towards focus and work. So wrapping up in 5 minutes, and then I'm going to explain to you how the working group aspect will work, so get ready for that. Welcome back from your break. So what you're going to do right now is open up your folders and take out some sheets. You want to take out this one first, and this is the one that has blue on the top of it, and it's entitled Working Group Discussion Worksheet. So everybody take out this blue one. And you also want to take out this single one that looks similar, and it's called Final Plenary Worksheet. So those two sheets are the focus right now. So when you get into your groups, you have signed up in your different groups. You have joined the groups based on your experiences and interests, one that you feel your voice is going to be very valuable and you can make a meaningful contribution to that group. So you will have signed up under legislation, under policy, under social norms and prevention, under essential services, under data, and under collaboration. And if you haven't signed up as yet, if you decide that you're interested in a group, when that group starts to move, you just move with that group. So taking a closer look at this blue sheet, when you separate off into your groups, because there are breakout rooms available to us as well, so you'll be told where the breakout rooms are. It's going to be 2 groups per room. 2 are going to stay here, 2 will go into a breakout room, and 2 into another breakout room. So I'm given to understand it's 3 rooms total. 2 groups will stay here, 2 groups will go to one breakout room. You'll be told where that is, and 2 in the other breakout room, and you'll stay far from each other so that you won't disturb each other. So then when you get into your group, you write down your group topic. So that would be the legislation, policy, the pillar. So you write that topic. Then from among you, you select a group facilitator, someone who's going to guide the discussion. 3 groups will also have to choose a note taker, a rapporteur, because we have 3 rapporteurs. So 3 groups will have to choose their own, and then 3 groups will be a little bit luckier because they will be able to benefit from the rapporteurs that have been assigned to the entire proceedings. But we don't have 6 rapporteurs. So it is what it is. Then after that, the group will come up with a problem statement. You'll work together to create a problem statement. Following that, there is room to write the challenge. So you have problem statement, and then you have challenge number 1, and everything is supposed to flow logically from one to the other. So the point of this sheet is to help you organize your thoughts. So we've been talking a lot. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of information, but how do we distill that into something that's actionable? This sheet is supposed to help you do that. So you have your overall problem statement. You have one challenge that you've agreed as a group you want to address. So you write the challenge. You write what it is that you want to do in terms of a goal. And when you're making these goals, make sure they are SMART. You would be familiar with that acronym, that they're specific goals, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And then you have the bottom of the paper, the 3 weeks, the 6 months, the 1-year timeline, and the opportunity for collaboration. Everyone does not have to complete this. Everybody in the group has one because you want to be able to keep a record, you want to make your jottings, etc. However, one will be submitted per group. So everybody can discuss, you can make notes on your own personal one, but then when there's one that needs to go forward, only one will be submitted on behalf of the group. Now, the second paper, and we'll go over that in a second, just wanted to make sure that everybody understands the first paper. So you go off into your groups, 2 per room, you write down your group topic, you select your facilitator, you select your rapporteur. If you're not one of the groups that has been assigned a rapporteur, you write your problem statement, the 3 challenges, the goals related to those challenges, and then the different timelines you would like to see. And it's aspirational. And at the bottom, you have opportunities for collaboration. Then we come back and we will discuss those in plenary. There will be a plenary review, and depending on how the time looks, of the output of those groups. And remember, it's only 1 sheet per group that needs to come forward. The rest is for your own detailed note-taking. Then the final one, which says stakeholder and responsibility matrix, we hope to have a plenary discussion on that as well. However, since you're the group that will be focused on it, you'll be the group that will need to fill out the first part as well. So where it says goals, recommendation, we're on this sheet now. The one that is not blue, that says final plenary worksheet. You fill out the top of that as well. But then when we come back to plenary, we hope that the discussion about stakeholders and collaborations would be a wider discussion. But if you've been assigned to that pillar and you've had more discussion about it, then you would be the ones to fill out the top part, whereas the stakeholders and collaborators could be a larger discussion. But you can start filling that out too to set the basis of it so that when we come back to plenary, then the discussion can go from there. So is everybody clear? Yes. And it's one of those things that gets easier as you start it. So when you start writing down your problem statement, when you write the challenges, then it will lead more naturally into the goal. And then when you've come up with your goal, then you will be discussing in your groups to see, this is the timeline. What do we want to do at the 3-week mark? What do we want to do at the 3 to 6 month mark? Who is it that we think should be a responsible stakeholder? What would be the inputs and the resources that we need? Are there any opportunities for collaboration? So it's one of those things that when you get the initial instruction, it feels complicated, but when you start going on it, one thing flows cohesively from the next. So I trust that when you get going with it, it will start to take form in your minds and make sense and go through. The first one is more detailed with regard to the inputs and the resources and the stakeholders. But the second one, the one that does not have the blue and has final plenary worksheet, that one focuses more on stakeholders and collaboration, right? So that discussion is going to be more geared towards stakeholders and collaboration, the responsible stakeholders who would collaborate. But just so that we are reminded what we're talking about, that's why there's some repetition at the top of the page. So have you divided into groups? You know which group you're in. You've signed up because you were supposed to sign up at the back during break. Do people know who would be in the legislation group? So the legislation group, who's in legislation, you can stand. Okay, so the legislation group could move over there so it's visible who you are and the size of the group, because we don't want to end up with a group that is massive and one that's very tiny. So we'll see if we have to do any reorganizing. But the legislation group is over there, so we can have a visual of the size of the group. How about policy? So group up close, so it's clear that you're a group and we can see how big or small the group is. How about policy? Whose policy? If you're on policy, stand over here. This is legislation. Like, get tighter, group tighter. And this is policy. Who's in social norms and prevention? Go over here by this table. Yeah. So this is policy. Social norms and prevention is over here. Who's in essential services? Our essential services go to the back, so it's clear that you're in a separate group, so I can see how you're looking in terms of size. Are we making roughly even divisions? Who's in data? Our data can stand by the door. No, it's two people. So data by the door. Okay. Awesome. And the final one is collaboration. There's two. There are two people in. Yeah. So collaboration can go here. Close, get close so I can see. All right, so over here is legislation. No, legislation, policy, social norms, essential services, collaboration, and data. Is there anybody who would like to go over to data? Okay. Each person had the work group discussion worksheet, but then ultimately it went into one of these. Then you also had the final plenary worksheet where you looked at goals, 3-week objectives, the 3 to 6 month objective, the 1 year objective, and the focus of that one was recommendations. So as you select the person to give the report to the larger group, the focus, again, I'm going to repeat it because I know there's always a lot of rich discussion on all of these issues. The focus of your report to the group is the actions and recommendations that you have identified as a result of your rich discussion. So if you spoke about legislation, you had all sorts of discussions, you thought about the resources, etc. Your focus now, as you share with us, will be the concrete actions and recommendations. Same thing for the other groups. Each person will have 10 minutes to present your actions and recommendations to the large group, and then you can have some feedback from the group. But I urge you, if you are okay with what the group has said, you don't have to comment on it because we want to keep things moving. So if you think the group has done an excellent job, they've said everything you want to say, you don't have any burning thing to add, you don't have anything to rebut, you can just give them a thumbs up and we can move on to the next one. You can also focus your feedback from the plenary group on stakeholders, collaborations, and next steps. But we'll see it unfold as we get started. So 10 minutes, and I will clear my throat pointedly when the 10-minute mark arrives. All right, so who's up first? Who feels ready to go with the recommendations? And if you don't get to say everything, that is fine. It is written. It will go to the rapporteurs. It will become a part of the meeting report, and it will count. It will matter. Okay, let's start at the top with legislation. How many are here? What are you? Okay. Yeah, I spoke to them. They're on their way. Continue. They'll pick back up. Yeah, you can stay there.
Good afternoon. Now, our group dealt with legislation, and we recognize that there has been 9 years has passed really since there has been some amendments to the domestic violence legislation, and we believe that it's timely. It is ripe for a comprehensive review. We think that it's timely now for a comprehensive review of the legislation. And in this context, we are making the proposal for the review, and we are looking at the substantive changes, adjustments that should occur. One such problem are the definitions in the Act, and we believe that these are limited in scope and require enlargement, some expansions. For example, in relation to the definition of spouse, we believe that that should be redefined, and section 6.5, things like where it speaks to male, we believe it should be gender neutral, and that should be deleted. And in so doing, persons should be substituted instead of male. And in looking at that was our first challenge. I'll speak with the challenges first. The second challenge we looked at was the amending of the forms. We believe that the forms should be redesigned and so that they would become more user-friendly and technologically interactive. And in terms of the physical form, there should be more room for persons to state their grievance. If you look at the Form 1 in the Act, you would see that it is very limited. And therefore, in addressing our goals or recommendations, first of all, we have suggested that when the form is redesigned, explanatory notes should be added so that all persons using the form would be more aware of what is required and would also lend to persons who are assisting to be more able to assist them. Those are the two main challenges we looked at. We didn't come up with a third one. We thought that the act in itself was pretty good with just these adjustments being required. Now, to look at the recommendations, obviously, we said the amendments are crucial, and we, as a goal, said that within three to 6 months, a cabinet paper should be laid with the drafted instructions for cabinet approval, and this should be then sent on to CPC. And as you know, that is the Chief Parliamentary Counsel responsible for the drafting of the legislation. In looking at the resources, the input, we said the Ministry of Other Affairs, other NGOs and charities, and all the stakeholders, especially those present, should be incorporated into making these goals a reality. That's it. That's it. Yeah, we are just. That's what I'm doing. Let me see.
Did your group get a chance to work on any of the possible collaborations? The possible collaboration?
We recognize that legislation is our intention, but it has to move from policy. So we rely heavily on that group that is coming with policy, because legislation comes after there's a policy that is accepted by the government and it moves into legislation. But we recognize, as Ms. Carter-Nichols was saying, as a group, that there's a need for gender neutrality throughout. It must be consistent. But it's not consistent in the Act, and that's why we are looking at the definition section, because it specifically talks about a male offender and him having to go to this particular thing. And we thought that that was offensive. We have to be consistent. And that was one of our problems that we had, and that's why we look at the definitions. And that's why we're recommending changes in the definitions so that they do not offend any particular groups or categories of persons, because it has to be neutral. Thank you.
Thank you.
So does anyone else from the larger group have anything to add briefly? Okay, you want it to be next? Okay. All right, so this is which group? This is
Can
data.
you hear me? No, is it on? Okay, okay. Right.
All right,
So
and don't
this-
forget that the focus is on the recommendations.
Right. So this is the data group. I was going to share the names of the people, but you said to only stress the recommendation. So we also have the names of the people. The first problem statement that we identified was lack of available, comparable data. And the challenge we identified is that different groups experience domestic violence and need to be covered besides spouses and partners. So mother-son examples, mother-son, siblings, the elderly, etc. And the challenge is that we need to have a protocol that covers all these groups the way that the legislation does. The goal is to have a national prevalence survey of intimate partner violence that allows for coverage of other types of violence following the model of the CARICOM protocol. And the actions, am I doing the right thing? Okay. The actions that we identified were at week 3 to get information on the AG's office, the Attorney General's office, to see how the how domestic violence survey questions can be included in that victimization survey that we understand that the DV's office is coming up with. So it is how to get that survey, to get information on whether it does right now, and if not, how to get it to accommodate domestic violence data. And we identify the stakeholders and the persons responsible to be the Ministry of Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Bureau of Gender Affairs in particular being a lead agency, the AG's office, and the Ministry of Home Affairs. That's in the 3 weeks. In the 3 to 6 months, we are identifying an action of designing a domestic violence questionnaire to be included in that victimization survey if it does not already accommodate those, because we were not sure about that. The responsible agencies would be civil society organizations and NGOs, international organizations, the Ministry of Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and a committee that is made up of key stakeholders. So this is a new organ that we're identifying. A committee made up of key stakeholders that can be an oversight committee. And the inputs and resources that we identified they would need in order to be able to design that kind of questionnaire or to follow the one victimization survey that's being done to make sure that the issues that we want covered are covered, is specialist consultants, finances in order to be able to do this, and training, as well as feedback, the access to feedback. And in a year, the actions that we identified in relation to this activity would be to conduct the prevalence survey on IPV, which gets specific data on intimate partner violence that is comparable then with other countries in the region, because that is a very expensive process, and it hasn't been done in Barbados, although it has been done in several other countries. The agencies that would be facilitating this would be Statistical Services Department, the committee of key stakeholders, and the recognition that in order to capture some of this sensitive data from women, that female interviewers have to be trained to produce this data. Often it is not possible to get that kind of data from a man. So input and resources is in terms of, in order to be able to conduct that survey, the designing, the piloting of the survey, and then the final collection of data according to the protocols that are established in the CARICOM study. The second, opportunities for collaboration, particularly in view of the prevalence survey. We've identified that UN Women are interested in supporting, IDB is interested in supporting, and we're also pulling out one of the NGOs in particular to be collaborators, and that is the LGBTQI coalition, because their questions and concerns will be lost unless they're championed by interested parties. We've also pulled out the Barbados, the women, well, Lord of mercy, I have BPWC, Professional Women's Group. Business and yes, I'm sorry, I know it and it disappeared. The Business and Professional Women's Club, in particular, the shelter. So that was our first challenge. Our second challenge is information sharing, interdepartmental as well as interagency. So that's state to others as well, and the public, as well as interdepartmental sharing, which is identified as an issue. The goal is to encourage sharing of data among stakeholders. In terms of actions, 3 weeks, we've identified that sensitization workshops are needed in order to map what information is needed and who has what information. We're also wanting those workshops to identify the challenges to sharing information. The stakeholders, it would be all the key stakeholders there, the police, the courts, NGOs, and civil or society organization, ministries of health, ministries of education, housing, and similar kinds of agencies of government that clear stakeholders, and the inputs, resources that we identified for that 3-week activity is finance for the small group interactions that involve information personnel of those stakeholders. So all the stakeholders will be represented, but we're bringing together specifically the information personnel. The 3 to 6 months period, we want to see an action of standardization of definitions and of protocols. So right now they're not, so standardization of definitions and of protocols. The agencies that we are looking to share responsibility as well as stakeholders in this would be the RSS, Regional Security Services Observatory Platform, and the Chief Parliamentary Council, the drafting division, and the police. We've highlighted those, there are probably others, but those are key ones. And the inputs that we see there in that digitization, that standardization process is digitization of information, access to software, including identifying personnel to input information into this hardware, and the training, both technical and in terms of sensitization to the issues of DV for those personnel. At the 1-year period, we identify that there is, in addition to having these workshops that pull people into informal, more or less informal ways of agreeing to information sharing, there is need for the drafting of legislation to cover data sharing. And of course, the agencies responsible we've identified as the OAG, Office of Attorney General, and the Chief Parliamentary Council. The opportunities for collaboration in doing those activities we identify as the Ministry of Investment, Science and Technology, MIST. Innovation, sorry. Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology. We also identify external technology agencies, and we include their Invest Barbados, which is a private company that exists within MIST, but also other technology gurus. We also identify opportunity for collaboration with the UWI and with the Ministry of Empowerment, MPEA, Empowerment and Elder Affairs. The third and final challenge is you can have the data standardized, you identify issues and people who can work, but we need to have that data access for policy and action by agents, by the state as well as by non-state actors. It is that a lot of the data that we now collect is not presently used. So the goal is to make data more accessible to the public and to agencies of the state. The public being both individual members of the public as well as the NGO and civil society sectors. In terms of the actions, in order to achieve that, we identified that there is a police records management information system that is not fully operational. So we are identifying that there needs to be full activation of that program. The OAG and the police would be responsible stakeholders, and the inputs and resources that would be needed in order to have this full activation would be training, hardware, access to hardware, more personnel, and finances. We were told to think big, dream large. So we are dreaming. Okay. In the 3 to 6 month period, we are recommending the establishment of the Criminal Justice Research Platform, which is an idea in the making, but we want to see it fully established, to move beyond idea stage. The agencies responsible would be Criminal Justice Planning Unit. And the resources that are identified for that activity would be software, training, both technical and sensitization training, and staff assigned to input data. In the 1 year period, we perceive that the action that can be taken is that there would be publication anonymous data, obviously, to facilitate that access for research and policy action. The agencies would be the Office of Attorney General, Statistical Department, media houses as well. We've identified inputs and resources, digitized platforms. We identified media education as an input into being able to, media meaning the public media, media. And another input or resource would be university researchers. And the opportunities for collaboration is all the stakeholders that we've identified there. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the data group. From the larger group, when you're thinking of challenges with the data, does anybody else have any other actions or recommendations that can be taken? Go ahead.
Yes, that notion of people sharing data anonymously is important in order to be able to get the data, but in the final publication of data, it would be anonymous data. It would be numbers that would be shared, but it's an important point. People often fail to answer surveys if they don't know, if they feel that people are going to know who it is.
Okay, so we're making sure that that point comes out in the final submission from the data group. However, it is done anonymity, confidentiality, so that whoever is involved can feel confident that their data will be treated in the strictest confidence and that they will feel comfortable to share the necessary information.
Thank you. I just wanted to suggest to the data group that that you need to know the conventions, all of the conventions that Barbados is a signatory to, so that when you're asking people to collect data, it's linked to something. Because you might be collecting a lot of data, but then when you get the questions from the various convention people who are asking for Barbados reports, it's different and it's kind of a challenging trying to find. So I'm just saying that they need to be linked, that we need to know the conventions and how the conventions are delivered when they're sent for reports.
Okay, so that point is noted as well, making sure that there is a framework, a convention guiding the data collection so it maps onto something. Somebody else you had your hand up before.
Yeah, thank you very much to the data group for a very excellent presentation. And I appreciate what you said about including and the perspective of the LGBTQ plus community. But I just wanted to reiterate that I think that data should be collected, disaggregated in terms of not just sex, but gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, for example, to gather as much context as possible to understand what your data means, because without that, you're going to miss some very key intersections and some very key issues where policy intervention might be very relevant and very timely. Thank you, that's all.
Right.
One suggestion that I had was to actually collect data from the courts, if that isn't done already. I'm not sure, to just publish a list of how many applications there were, but somebody could also, as a confidential internal person, go and just look at all of the forms that were submitted and take information from those, and perhaps note the outcomes as well.
So, for managers to remind themselves that the initial collection of data is not the end all of things, but that there should be arrangements for periodic updating of the data. And particularly in small economies like ours, where we always plead the lack of or the dearth of resources, we have to make sure that we're not playing catch up each time a question or query may arise in an international forum or even a national crisis, to jump to say, oh, but we don't have it present day. It is going back for 5, 6, 8 years. So we always need to make sure we maintain the currency of the data that we're relying on, especially as we always tout the need to make data-driven decision-making.
Okay, thank you. Any more on data? Okay, let's move on. Who else is ready to focus on the recommendations, the actions, social norms? Okay.
Good afternoon. So the group which focused, I guess not. Good afternoon. Okay. So the group which focus on social norms and preventions, we start to first define it. Social norms are, and we defined it as the cultural beliefs, accepted behaviors, customs, social operations, traditions, and trends that shape how individuals and communities interact. And we noted that these norms can be changed or influenced over time. And our problem statement really is that domestic violence in Barbados remains a persistent issue. It's deeply embedded in our social norms that shape the attitudes, behaviors, and responses to abuse. The kind of cultural expectations and traditional beliefs and accepted behaviors that influence how relationships are formed and sustained, often normalizing things like control, gender-based power imbalances, and the silencing of victims. And through this, we talked about the discussion where, people say that you don't get a man or woman's story, it is not your business, that things happen in relationships and in families and they figure it out, so you don't spread it on the street, and that's even if it's detrimental. We also talked about toxic love and the complex nature of love and the definitions of love that can be rooted in various socioeconomic characteristics like your race, religion, and those different things. The protection of decency, this idea of what is decent, so remaining in households, staying with one man, and those different things, even to the detriment of individuals. One of the things we addressed is also fixed power dynamics, so financial aid, having children and needing to stay in a relationship, familial pressures to remain in the relationship, and perceptions of relationship with linked to ownership. And that was also linked to things like gatekeeping. And we acknowledge in the group that a lot of times it would be women who gatekeep relationships and decency and those different things in our communities when they talk to their children and those different things. And so we identified 3 critical social norms that contribute to the perpetuation of domestic violence. These were toxic definitions of love and relationships. Many of these are framed around control, jealousy, and dominance rather than mutual respect. The protection of the nuclear family over individual safety. And so the idea that we should preserve the traditional family unit while victims remain in abusive situations to maintain appearances or protect children or avoid social stigma. And then the perpetuation of patriarchy and the damsel in distress narrative. The first challenge that we identified would be toxic definitions of expressions of love and relationships. So the goal is to promote healthy relationship models and redefine love as respect, equality, and mutual support or partnership. And so at week 3, the launch of a public awareness campaign on healthy relationships, utilizing various platforms, and this is something to be sustained because we recognize that social norms, because of how embedded they are, it needs to be sustained, it needs to be strategic, and so we'll be using things that we need, the inputs and resources would be media materials, funding and expert guidance. Responsible stakeholders would include persons like Ministry of People Empowerment, the Ministry of Education, NGOs, media houses. And one of the things that we touched on is that even as we talk about public awareness, we might roll our eyes and say, oh dear, public awareness again. But it really is about doing it different and recognizing that with each generation, we have to continuously do public education and also adapt our methods of education to match where generations may be. The other thing that we spoke at 3 to 6 months, implement school-based programs on emotional intelligence and respect in relationships. And this could include anything from poetry competitions to other activities, school tours, having social workers go in, small focus groups in schools. But we would need to develop a curriculum, have trained facilitators, and ensure that the schools are on board. And so your responsible stakeholders, Ministry of Education, social workers, and other youth organizations, because what we want to do is include young people from conception in particular. And this is not to say that, it only focuses on young people, because we also acknowledge that domestic violence happens at every age and can happen at every age. And so because we recognize that, we want to cater to everyone, but we also want to ensure that young people are at the conception stage, because sometimes we do things like this and we include young people as recipients and not active participants in it, and so it causes a challenge where they're not as engaged as you might want them to be. At 1 year, we'd want to establish community-based support groups and mentorship programs for young couples and parents, and we see this as a natural progression. But particularly because we want to be able to talk about the things very intimately and in a real way about the things that cause domestic violence, some of those habits within the sexual reproductive space that contribute to domestic violence, and in some, depending on who the facilitators are or the persons delivering the interaction or delivering the information, they may seek to avoid that out of, politeness or decency once again. And so making sure that the content is realistic and that it applies to people's real lived experiences. And so we'd want to engage with, we need space for meetings, trained mentors, and community engagement. The responsible stakeholders are your community centers, faith-based organizations, psychologists, NGOs, and social workers. Challenge 2, the protection of the nuclear family at all costs. And what our goal is to shift societal attitudes to prioritize individual well-being and safety over family preservation. So at 3 weeks, we'd want to conduct media discussions on the importance of survivor well-being over maintaining traditional family units. And one of the things that we see as being very important to this is providing knowledge of all the conventions and letting persons know what their rights are and their protections are, because a lot of persons do not know, and we often take that for granted. And so we need media access, survivor testimonies, and legal expert input. And our stakeholders will be media houses, domestic violence advocates, legal experts, and faith-based organizations. Now, we recognize that there are already organizations in communities doing work, doing good work, doing hard work, and needed work. And so we don't want to just dismiss that and throw out the baby with the bathwater, but more so to train community leaders and faith-based organizations to support survivors and promote alternative family structures. And we recognize the need for standardization in the idea that persons who are responding or who are seeking to educate on things like domestic violence, there should be a standardized curriculum or information that they have so that it's not different strokes for different folks simply because we may have a different understanding, but there has to be a standard. And so there'll be training modules established, and then we'll need funding and also partnership development, of course, with the entities that would be delivering the training. And so the stakeholders are faith-based organizations, social workers, and government agencies. And then recognizing that we've done all of this, what we then want to do is to implement and to look at and to implement legal and policy reforms in support of alternative caregiving structures for things like protective housing, extended social services, and educational reform. So we need policy development, legislative review, and of course, government funding. And then the stakeholders would be Parliament, legal experts, social services, and domestic violence advocates. And so our last challenge, which is the perpetuation of patriarchy and the damsel in distress ideology, seeks to empower persons to be self-sufficient, empower women to be self-sufficient and to challenge gender stereotypes in general. And so at 3 weeks, we'd want to develop and circulate educational materials that challenge gender stereotypes. And we recognize right now that we do a very us versus them kind of model. There are a lot of women-only groups, and then there are a lot of men-only groups. And what we recognize that there is a need for training that is specific to genders, because we experience and we navigate the world in different ways. There also has to be a curriculum or educational material that complements each other, because we're going to find ourselves with the same challenges if we're only catering to one gender and not the other. And so the input or resources needed: content creation, printing, and online distribution, responsible stakeholders, gender affairs organizations, and this covers everybody. This is the umbrella term. So once an organization is involved with or has any relationship with gender affairs, we will want them to be involved in the development of the curriculum and the circulation that challenges these gender stereotypes, media houses, as well as educators. And then 3 to 6 months, we'd want to launch an empowerment program focusing on economic independence and self-defense for women, because one of the things that we know that comes up consistently is that a lot of persons find themselves in a situation where there's financial abuse, but also there's this expectation where men are supposed to provide, and that feeds into patriarchy. It promotes this damsel in distress idea that women are incapable of doing certain things. And so we want to start addressing that, but also self-defense, because we know that while the highest level of violence we see would be to man to man, persons would say that women do fear violence, and we are often at a disadvantageous position based on the fact that men are typically stronger. And so having self-defense techniques adds an additional layer in some instances of protection, not to say that it's going to make it foolproof. And so we need to design programs, have trainers, and have financial support. Responsible stakeholders are once again your NGOs, financial institutions, and law enforcement. And then at 1 year, we'd want to establish mentorship networks for men and women, which promote leadership and resilience. And the aim of this is really to address the challenges, or once again, the perpetuation of patriarchy and damsel in distress ideologies. So we're looking again at mentorship program design, funding, and community support. And so the responsible entities would be women's advocacy groups, corporate sponsors, and government agencies. And one of the things that we found to run central to addressing social norms and dealing with it and the prevention of domestic violence is really the need for education, re-education, and empowerment. And the reason for that is because we practice things every day that sometimes we don't necessarily notice that we are perpetuating. And so it becomes very important for us to have a whole of society approach that gets everybody involved in addressing domestic violence, so everybody understands what their role is in the prevention of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you identify any other opportunities for collaboration?
No, we didn't get that far.
Okay. So will the rest of the group help in terms of opportunities for collaboration?
Do you mean in terms of like the specific organizations? We mentioned IGDS. We talked about schools and the ministries, so Ministry of Education, Ministry of People's Empowerment, Bureau of Gender Affairs. Those were the organizations that we mentioned. Or more? Mm-hmm. Men's? Oh, yeah, sure. So when we said gender, based on the time when we said gender affairs organization.
So you meant the umbrella.
Men's fell under that, and men's fell under that. But health, yes. Anything else? I can come down? Good.
When you have your sheet to a point where you're comfortable with it and it's nice and legible, you can hand it to the rapporteurs, the meeting rapporteurs. So you can hand here, or where's Dr. go? Right, yes. Okay. So this is policy? Essential services, okay.
Essential services. What we recognize, and I think we recognize that we do good work, but sometimes that good work has not been recognized by all of us. Our particular challenge that we came up with as relates to the problem statement is the lack of identification on what the essential services exist, and we want to do it parish by parish. And we want to look at domestic violence as a family issue more so than a particular person or individual. So we're seeing domestic violence as relates not only to the victim, but also to the perpetrator, and also recognizing the children in that relationship. So our first challenge was that lack of identification. And so we decided that we should create a domestic violence directory of all essential services. And we're doing it parish by parish, not as yet, because that's the end. At the end, that's what we should have. So we're creating that directory. After we've created that directory, we want to promote and publicate the listing of all those services whose protocols we need to know, as well as how to access those services. So it's one thing to say we have the services there, but how are they accessible? How do we get involved? How do we become a part of that? Next step, we felt that we will then build on the interagency collaboration through training as well as peer support. So each essential service, and when I speak of essential services, we are looking not only at health, education, social, economic, religion, psychology, legislation, as well as religion. So you can imagine that our groups are not only faith-based groups, but we also have NGOs in there, government groups, and we also want to put a plug for children and parent groups. So in creating that list of essential services, we're also going to promote the information with a QR code and using all types of social media platforms that are available, whether it's Facebook, and I think we discovered the new term now is the X. It's no longer you have Facebook, but it's not TikTok, but it's, Twitter. It's X. Everybody. And then, in terms of the collaborations that we're doing, we also want to mend any particular gaps that will be seen. And we also want to do some swapping. So yes, we know health is doing something, education is doing something, but let's spend some time in each other's space and see how we're doing it. The idea then, between 3 to 6 months, we'll be updating the directory. We'll also be building our corporate relationships and seeking grant funding and any true proposals, etc. And we're also doing a bit of research as well, because if we're bringing everybody together in our training, we still need to know how are we doing as a group. Added to that, because I'm sure you recognize it's a lot of work and it's a lot of people work. So we're also building in the idea of our wellness clinics, our need for debriefing, and our need for self-care as well. By the end of the year, not only should we have covered all the parishes on the island, we should also be able to maintain and lobby for any additional apps. I spoke to you in terms of the swap. There's also annual drives of activism, and we're also monitoring, evaluating, and giving any feedback as arrive out of it. I want to share with you some of the slogans we came up with. Hopefully you will find them enjoyable. Love, don't hate you so. Save a life and know your essential services. Stop, think, make a difference. Services are essential. Stop, pause, access, and reinforce. Thank you.
So do we have any additional recommendations or actions for either social norms and prevention, or essential services?
All questions will be answered by the group. Go ahead.
Try to connect, not just in the island, but regionally and
Yes, in
internationally.
terms of building our capacity.
Yes.
And exchanges between, yes. Thank you.
Was this the group that dealt with police officer responses, or was that a different group?
Yeah, they were part of us. And so in terms of the legislation, in terms of the response to the police, we actually thought of, when we spoke about the SWAT, this is where we are together. Right now, I'm told in the police force, they have this group of negotiators, which brings in an additional person that helps with their negotiating of what is taking place at that particular point in time. So it's not just a police response, but it's a team response to the situation.
Yeah. I asked because I noticed the legislation provided for the police to keep a register, and I was wondering if that is if that happens at present, and if not, if that would be something to be addressed as an action point. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we want to bill it more than the police keeps a register, social workers keep a register, but can we collaborate in that particular register and see if there are any common trends in that particular list?
All right, so hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I just wanted to flag that you should make sure that whatever messaging that you're doing, make sure it's accessible for persons with disabilities. So whether you need to make sure you have captions on your videos on social media, or you need to have interpreters, sign language interpreters at your workshops, etc. Just making sure that it is accessible to persons with disabilities, given that there are a higher risk of experiencing some of this domestic violence. Thank you.
Accepted. So make
Accessible,
it more
yeah.
inclusive, right? Inclusive.
Inclusive and accessible.
Inclusive and accessible.
Hey, good evening. Just wanted to know if when you said that you are going to look at the inclusiveness, not just look at the police, but when you're going to a situation that you don't only have the police, but you also have like a mental health nurse and the ambulance and the fire service to diffuse the situation one time, as opposed to waiting until the matter escalates after you leave. So there's something to think about.
And maybe I wasn't totally clear, but I'm sure my team would say we definitely discussed that, where it's a real team approach, looking at the particular presentation of the individual and where it starts. So it may be depending on the call or depending on our response, then you'll know you're part of a team, which team member responds.
Any more for either social norms or essential services?
Council had mentioned the report, the police report. So just here peeping at the amendment to 2016 and the Form 6. So I'm going to ask the officer who is here at my table in terms of the domestic violence police report, what y'all do with these reports that the legislation would require you to fill out, what you do with them.
And he's all part of essential services, okay?
That report goes to persons from the family conflict unit and as well as the commissioner of police. They will have these reports on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. It looks as though we're ready. I'm not seeing any other hands from the floor. So we can move on along to policy. Policy is moving.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we are doing policy, and our problem statement is a bit long, but I think it's necessary. So our problem statement is that there's a need for a published, comprehensive domestic violence policy that is consistent with international best practice, that allows Barbados to fulfill its international human rights obligations, that is suitable for the local context, and is inclusive and intersectional. And so the first challenge we have under that is that there is a lack of prioritization of domestic violence as a national issue. And our goal, therefore, is to elevate domestic violence as a national priority. So in terms of timelines now, so in the first 3 weeks, what we suggested is that the report out of this forum is produced in a timely manner and published, and is circulated to all of the key stakeholders. And the inputs and resources would obviously be the rapporteurs and responsible stakeholders, therefore, Attorney General's Office, NPEA, UN Women, IDB, and also all of the stakeholders present here today, as well as the National Committee on Gender-Based Violence. And then within the 3 to 6 month time frame, our first recommendation is to create an inclusive domestic violence task force, or expand the membership and scope of the existing National Committee on Gender-Based Violence, so that it is more inclusive and covers the 6 areas that each of the groups talked about today. So legislation, policy, social norms and prevention, essential services, data, and collaboration. And also in terms of diverse representation, ensuring that, for example, that there's an LGBTQ plus representation. I'm not sure about the representation of persons with disabilities, but ensuring that on that committee that there is that representation. And also considering, for example, having entities responsible for emergency response, understanding that domestic violence is increased and heightened within an emergency context. And our second recommendation within the 3 to 6 month time frame was obviously need to cost this action plan that is produced out of the outputs of this forum. So we need to cost the action plan, and the inputs and resources, we need finances. We need the capacity building of the membership, and the prospective membership of the task force or the expanded committee. The stakeholders, therefore, would be the Ministry of Finance, social services stakeholders, international development partners, Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, civil society organizations, AG's office, the medical profession. And then in terms of, so at the end of year 1, what we would want to see, and I think it was actually mentioned by quite a few groups, the digitization of the magistrate court record and data related to gender-based violence to help guide policy implementation. And our inputs and resources, we had a suggestion in that we have students that need give-back hours. Can the students not assist in digitizing some of these records? And obviously another input then would be finances for things like the student stipends, software training, etc. Responsible stakeholders would be UE, BCC, Family Conflict Unit, Magistrates Courts, social services stakeholders, Ministry of People Empowerment, Elder Affairs, Attorney General's Office, and civil society organizations. And the opportunities for collaboration would be UE, KPIL, and BCC through student internships or volunteer programs, and also the opportunity to collaborate with lecturers, for example, in some areas, or the areas that we suggested were things like social work, law, and medicine. And this is given the fact that confidentiality would be part of their professions when they do graduate, so they would have a better, we think, and better understanding of confidentiality. And obviously, we will provide them with training so that they understand their responsibilities when it comes to handling this sensitive data. And then another opportunity for collaboration is inter-entity collaboration. So whether it's between government entities, between government and civil society, academia, international development partners, and media, there's a need for inter-entity collaboration across the board. So that was our challenge 1. And we only did 2 challenges, so this is our second and last challenge. Challenge 2 is lack of resources for domestic violence first responders and key stakeholders. And our goal is to increase resources for and capacity of these persons and entities. So within a 3-week timeline, we said that we didn't have any actions for the first 3 weeks because we wanted to wait for the outputs from this forum to help guide, what would happen in the future. So in a 3 to 6 month time period, therefore, we would want to do some training for the first responders and the key stakeholders in trauma-informed service provision and care, also diversity, equity, and inclusion. You would want to also do some stakeholder mapping, understanding that the landscape has changed as it relates to domestic violence and some of the inputs, and therefore the existing stakeholders may not be, there may be more stakeholders than you may think. So do some stakeholder mapping. Also, another one is to develop first responder standard operating procedures so that there's a consistent approach across the board, regardless of where a person enters the system. And also, we would want to create a registry of trained persons, because from what I understand and what we understood as a group, there were people who were already trained in things like trauma-informed care and response, diversity, equity, inclusion, etc., already within the system, and therefore have a registry of those persons who are already trained to help them kickstart the sensitization process within their own areas of work. And again, as I said before, train some others across the board. Inputs and resources, we need specialized trainers, and I think it's important to have specialized local trainers who would understand the local context of Barbados. And I know they do exist. Resources, human and financial resources in particular, would be necessary for these 3 action points. Responsible stakeholders, police, clerks, magistrates, the medical profession, social services stakeholders, civil society organizations, the legal profession, Ministry of People Empowerment, Elder Affairs, the Attorney General's Office, and international development partners. And at the end of year 1, we suggest that funding be sought for the one-stop shop initiative with a single data management system. And the second recommendation is to have a specialized domestic violence court. And to do that, we would need IT resources, you need funding, you need human resources, infrastructure, technical support, and MIST, the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology, we recognize as a stakeholder, as well as the Attorney General's Office, and PEA, social services, again, medical profession, Ministry of Finance, Barbados Bar Association, and the legal profession, civil society organizations, and international development partners. And in terms of collaboration, now, we think there needs to be more intergovernmental agency collaboration between civil society organizations themselves, more collaboration between the civil society and government agencies, and also collaboration amongst CSOs, government agencies, international development partners, as well as the media. And that was it for our policy. Thank you very much.
We have any more recommendations or actions that you think that policy could possibly take?
Don't go too far. I'm going to tag Magistrate Fredericks. So Magistrate Fredericks, you said you were waiting on policy, and your policy is going to inform your legislation. So out of all that was presented, I was thinking, I wonder if you're thinking the same. Are you thinking that, especially last point, creating the specialized court, you're thinking then that the Magistrates Court Act, because then it means that you're pulling the functions then in terms of Domestic Violence Protection Act and those things out to deal with specialized court. Are you thinking then that you're amending the Magistrates Court Act, or what are you going to pull out of what she said for your legislation?
I'm not going to be able to answer that. But what I realized from this afternoon's presentations is that each particular segment is important because the numbers are going to inform the policymakers. The policymakers then are going to seek funding. The IADB has said that if they get the numbers, they will be able to help. So therefore, I have recognized the importance of each segment here. And going forward, I'm hoping that these things will help us to realize that court that you are talking about, which I recommended.
Hi, good evening. My comment though is having listened to all the presentations, I find that in terms of collaboration, I find that we tend to stick into governmental agencies. I don't think we have really sought to seek the assistance or work enough with the private sector. And I think that this is an area that we need to get into working with the private sector, and we have to also appreciate domestic violence, the people who suffer domestic violence who work in the private sector, right? So I don't think the conversation can just be among government. It has to be the private sector, so that, you know, they have a say to in how or some sort of input into what a policy could look like.
So partnerships within the private sector in between as well. Any more actions or recommendations falling under policy? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And the final group, collaboration.
Good afternoon. So for our problem statement, we have that many organizations are working to address domestic violence. Many organizations working to address domestic violence face challenges due to lack of awareness about other agencies and resources available in the community. This gap in knowledge limits their ability to collaborate effectively, share resources, and provide comprehensive support to victims. So often you would see survivors having delayed access to vital services or being confused about where to seek help and having emotional distress from navigating disjointed systems. So for our first challenge, we have that there is a lack of holistic assistance. So our goal would essentially be to build a coordinated and comprehensive support system by improving interagency awareness, creating centralized tools for collaboration, and fostering outreach. And with our timeline, in 3 weeks, we would intentionally find out who's essentially doing what. Who are the key players? What does your organization do? What support you offer? And we would do that through consultations with organizations like Bango or POWI to include faith-based organizations. We would create the list of initial agencies and begin mapping their expertise. Like I said earlier, our inputs and resources would be a phone directory, online resources, and using our contact networks. Months 3 to 6, we would have tailor-made campaigns for communities, and we would also try to use internationally recognized days. So, for instance, 16 days of activism, or even using things like Father's Day, Mother's Day, just to try to get more interactivity. Our inputs and resources here would be using Canva, using social media influencers, and using the traditional media. For year 1, this is where we would evaluate the database and essentially just monitor and evaluate what we would have done. We'd also have a review period so we can work to refine any community education efforts. And our inputs and resources here would be survey tools and evaluators. For this challenge, our responsible stakeholders and opportunities for collaboration would have been like UN Women, advocacy groups, community leaders, faith-based organizations. We looked at using NGOs such as NOW, Barbados Family Planning Association, the Ministry of Education. For our second challenge, this is where we decided that there was a lack of financial resources. And our goal here would be to diversify the funding streams and establish sustainable financial mechanisms in order to support the collaboration tools, the outreach campaigns, and then also the survivor-focused programs. So for the first 3 weeks, this is where we would work to identify what financial support is available. So this would be through government, private sector, or maybe international NGOs. Our input and resources here would be international funding agencies, human resources. We would have grant research experts, and of course, the sponsorship proposals. For months 3 to 6, this is where we would apply for grants and fundings, and we would also begin to plan fundraising campaigns. Yes, please. And our fundraising campaigns would be things such as silent auctions, galas, coming up with a domestic violence walk, and doing other competitions. For year one, we would work to establish long-term partnerships with donors and sponsors to have sustainable funding, and then we'd also evaluate the effectiveness of our fundraising efforts to improve future campaigns. Our inputs here would be HR, promotional material, media, impact reports, donor management systems, and retention strategies. For this challenge, our responsible stakeholders and opportunities for collaboration lies within private sector contributors, regional partners, businesses, advocacy groups, the same NGOs and community organizations, as well as crowdfunding platforms. Our third challenge looks at having overworked human resources. So our goal here would be to essentially just attract more champions for our cause. So to optimize workloads, recruit additional volunteers, and implement capacity building and wellness initiatives just to sustain staff engagement and collaboration. For the first 3 weeks, this is where we would essentially create an avatar, just so we would have a criteria for the type of human resources that we need. And we would also work to identify any bottlenecks or gaps. Inputs and resources here would be using volunteer recruitment platforms or using workload analysis tools. For months 3 to 5, this is where we would advertise, interview, and start hiring the personnel. We'd also work to have said personnel trained. So it's essentially just delivering capacity building workshops and developing task sharing models so we can distribute the workloads effectively. Our inputs and resources here would be training venues, having expert facilitators, scheduling software so we could work with a roster, as some persons may not be able to donate all of their time and be full-time as we would like. We tend to have many, many volunteers. For year one, this is where we would have the same monitoring and evaluation here. So we would be able to evaluate the workload of our personnel and the impact that they would have had on capacity building initiatives. We would implement wellness groups, including mental health support for those who are working more closely with survivors especially. Our input tools and resources here would be wellness tools, mental health professionals, our stakeholders, and opportunities for collaboration here would again lie with NGOs, regional partners. We would look to use volunteers from the Give Back program. and we would look for professional trainers. In terms of how these challenges connect back to our problem statement, for our challenge 1 with the holistic assistance, we would be establishing the directories, platforms, and the tools just to ensure that everyone knows about the other agencies and we can collaborate effectively. For challenge 2 with the financial resources, this is just working to secure sustainable funding so we could effectively create and maintain the collaboration tools and any providers and any programs that are survivor focused. For our challenge 3 with the human resources, this is just about optimizing the staff workloads and recruiting volunteers just so we can ensure that the organizations can focus on collaboration and we can provide more survivor-centered care and to avoid the whole having a small staff and having everyone being overworked. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much to the collaboration group. Do we have anything to add to that in terms of actions or recommendations for greater collaboration?
Just a comment in terms of collaboration goes well with essential services and everyone else. Yeah, thanks.
So we're seeing the connections, the through lines between all of the different areas.
Just add that for collaboration to continue, when governments change, that has to continue as well. There has to be that continuation and collaboration as an essential. It cannot be because another party didn't do this and they're now coming to reinvent the wheel. It has to continue because what we did today took time. I had to come out on my 2 off days. I will not get back. So don't waste people's times by, then another government comes and you're going to sit down and have this all over again to have the same ideas and more money not in my pocket. Thanks.
So on that particular point, which is very well taken, is there any suggestion for that? How do we make sure that the initiatives keep going?
I think that NGOs have to work together, and sometimes we need to remove the aspect in which government is there. Most of us know each other in one way or the other, and if we don't, we know somebody who knows the other person. And from experience, I know that collaboration with NGOs, even just if you remove government completely, it goes well. Even when we talk about funding, a lot of times our funding doesn't necessarily come from government. It comes from other partners. It comes from us. I don't know about y'all, but it's bag enough. So it comes from begging. And if that is the case, then government shouldn't be the reason that the work stops, especially when we know how to do the work well, and a lot of times how to do the work for a fraction of what it would cost the government to do the work for.
To tag team from what Roshana just said, that becomes a very viable option when we remove the territorial way in which we seek to work and we actually seek to collaborate, like for real, and build meaningful relationships with each other that we can then leverage in a healthy way to really advance the work. So I think one of the reasons why we keep coming back and having these talk shops and we're spinning top in mud is because we leave here and then we still go back and we try to do everything on our own, because let's be honest, there are many of us who just want the glory, right? We want to say that we did this, my organization did this, whatever. But if we remove that territorial way of operating, we would really see like true advancement in this critical work that we're trying to do. Any more on collaboration? We heard one difficulty in collaborating when you have the change in government. We heard a positive in the NGO space, that NGOs continue to work together. They persist despite the change in government. We were cautioned to be in it for the right reasons and not to be territorial. And that is why, if we're being honest with ourselves, sometimes we don't collaborate because we want to say my NGO is responsible for that. So any more on collaboration?
One quick comment from the perspective of someone that works in government and the whole issue of if you take the politics out of things or if one administration changes, let's hope that permanent secretaries who hopefully will continue then, depending on the age beyond ministers coming and ministers going, that they're sufficiently persuasive to be able at management meetings or ministers' meetings, new minister, to say, well, look, we have this thing, we were working on it before you came, this is where we're at with this policy, it's a good policy, and let's hope that that PS or DPS, as we would know, have that persuasive power to influence. That's all we can hope for.
Hi, good evening. Just one comment in terms of how we are navigating the space and understanding of household competence and the challenges in minority groups when it comes to addressing these social issues that are normally not addressed, but that are very, very prevalent within the minority groups as well. So these type of collaborations, it's also breaking the myths of what the perception is of the cultural practices as well.
Another thing just on collaboration also is that back to what Carrie Ann said about not being territorial. You know, NGOs operate from a space where resources, well, we all operate in spaces where resources are very limited. And like I said, I beg a lot. And I find that it would be more impactful and more useful, but also it would amplify the work of our organizations and the projects if instead of trying to do everything by ourselves or reinvent the wheel, that we just came together and we went for those resources based on a collection of organizations working together. And the reason that this pops up and is so important is because a lot of times we're looking at sometimes international donors and funders, and we recognize that a collection of organizations who have basically the same mission, even if some of our objectives may vary a little, it would be more impactful, useful, and it would also reach a lot more people, which would make our request a lot more favorable, particularly when you consider approaching even just corporate Barbados. One of their complaints is that we come with the same request over and over. And so by time they want to give, but they've already given to a gender organization or environmental organization, so they have nothing more. And whereas if we could just do it as a group and collaborate, it would allow for us to go a lot further than we currently do and make the work a lot more impactful for our communities and constituents.
Hello? Yeah, just my question then would be whether an alliance is needed and which organization would potentially lead it. Because is there another, that would seem to be a way to, somebody did mention Bango, but I'm not sure how many groups belong to Bango. If there's some other umbrella organization. Okay. But maybe a subcommittee then, or just a separate alliance that would capture everyone. Thank you.
So highlighting the power of umbrella organizations. Someone saying we have to find out more.
One last comment from me, and being honest about this. So we're talking, I'm using two words now, collaboration, because we're talking collaboration, we're here in the collaborative space. But I want to introduce a word that for me destigmatization. So I'm not anybody that's normally prejudiced about anything, but I must say that being in this collaborative space, before you can go out and sell any message to anybody else, because sometimes, we might have certain mindsets. When the lady, where she is, the lady that LBG, where's the lady that presented, right? And so I was like wrapping my head around it quietly. The legislation, the amendment, what she said over the last 2 days, and working it out for myself. And when I go from here, I quietly will work it out some more in terms of some of what she would have said about including the LGBT community within this whole discussion of domestic violence, volatility in terms of those, because at first when it came, I would not have had that in my contemplation, but it has caused me to open my mind to include. So I'm saying at the collaborative level, be the persons that are informed, think we know a lot. There's still more that from time to time, as norms and cultural norms, we come to think that we'll have to embrace and be open to having those discussions, whether in this forum or one-on-one, where you go find out more. What are you doing? What exactly did you do when you said you did something for UN? What did you produce? Where can I find it? That type of thing.
Sure, yeah. So the recognition that discrimination can exist within spaces that claim to be collaborative. And that if we are claiming to be collaborative and working for inclusion and diversity, etc., we must make space for vulnerable groups. Yeah.
Thank you. If I say something that was already said, please accept my apology, but I was outside for a little bit. But the discussion on inclusive, exactly that word, right? Right? It's something that I think that we need to interrogate a lot more at the personal level and at the professional level. Because at the end of the day, we all do work. Those of you who are still working are working based on the policy of government and are expected to execute the policy of government in way, form, or fashion. When I was working at the Bureau of Gender Affairs, I saw a delegation going to a UN conference where Barbados voted with those countries that we call the ones that are banned, the ones, I can't remember all the names, but Saudi Arabia, some other ones that hate women, and so on. And Barbados ended up voting with 7 countries that were basically recognized as countries, you're with me, right, Diane? That were not even accepted as part of normal society. And the reason why that was done was because the person who represented the country was a Christian. And I'm seeing this and I feel very strong about it. And I think that people need to understand their role as an officer of government and their commitment to God or whoever they believe in. And the two of them are separate. And if you cannot do the job that requires you to respect and do the things that is part of the policy of government, not an individual person, but the policy of government to be inclusive, then you should change your job. And I will not back away from that. And it has to be a basic principle because we cannot allow individuals to put Barbados on a blacklist because you are voting with all of the other countries, the few other countries that nobody represents, that nobody cares about, that does not even care about their people. So if you can't do the job, step away, step back down, or try to get a step up. But when it comes to our policy, we have to respect our policy. Other than that, we in a government no more. We ain't no people no more. Because whoever go up there that believe in whatever that do, that they can make a decision and put Barbados in a position that makes us unfriendly to the rest of the world.
Thank you for that, Nalita. Okay, so we have looked at the various areas: legislation, data, social norms and prevention, essential services, policy, collaboration. And we have a lot of recommendations in those areas. So we have actions and recommendations in all of those areas, yes? All right, we also have lists of possible collaborators in those areas. And we have stakeholders listed in those areas. And you have your papers all filled out. I'm ready to hand over to the rapporteurs. Okay, so it sounds like the working part of the working is done. Yes, you did well. You worked hard. We started the day a long time ago with the partner remarks. Then we had a recap from Dr. Gill, and in that recap, we got to see how much information came out of day one. That day one itself was filled with recommendations for best practice. Then we got the case presentation by the representative from the Office of the DPP who spoke about Tot Lambkin, and that made it easy to identify some of the gaps, both in service provision, in legislation, in first responder response or lack thereof. Then you got together in your groups and had some very positive collaboration. You got together in your groups and you had some rich discussion in walking around. I heard passion, I heard experience, I heard intensity and expertise coming out. Then you got back together, shared with the larger groups and had the opportunity to give more input, more actions, more recommendations to make sure that we didn't miss anything. And now we're to closing remarks. So I will now invite Mr. William Warner, the Director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs, to give some closing remarks.
Good evening again, colleagues. It's been 2 long days, but 2 exciting days. And if you agree with me, let us give ourselves a very big round of applause. Thank you. These 2 days have allowed us to examine the issue of domestic violence from the perspectives of policy, legislation, services, social norms and prevention, collaboration, and data. The Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, really extends its sincere appreciation to all of our partners in this venture. The Inter-American Development Bank, UN Women Multi-Country Office, the Office of the Attorney General. We also extend our sincere appreciation to all of you who have taken from your busy schedules to be here for these 2 days. And we really appreciate your participation. I also want to say a very special thanks to our rapporteurs who have done a fantastic job over the 2 days, and to our moderator, Ms. Daniel, who has been very excellent, and she deserves a round of applause. The Ministry of Empowerment and Elder Affairs looks forward very much to working with you in the future, as we strive to not only to reduce domestic violence, but also to achieve gender equality as a whole. In closing, I want to thank the Savannah Hotel for accommodating us for these 2 days. And last but not least, I want to give a big round of applause to my staff over there on the left-hand side. They have been tremendous support over 2 days. And I'm sure that we will meet again very soon in some other collaborative effort, and I really look forward to working with you all on another occasion. So thank you so much. Have a great evening, and get home safely.
Class dismissed.